She's just a delivery girl. That's what my brother said about me out loud at his graduation party, right before he asked me to leave because I was embarrassing him in front of his lawyer friends. No one laughed. No one defended me either. My parents stared at their drinks like I wasn't their daughter anymore. I stood there with my coat still on, realizing I hadn't even been invited to celebrate. I was only there to fill a seat until I became inconvenient. What none of them knew was this. For the last 4 years, every single student loan payment that kept my brother debt-free didn't come from scholarships or hard work. It came from me, quietly, automatically, month after month. I learned a long time ago that being underestimated can feel humiliating until you realize it's also protection. The restaurant they'd chosen was expensive, all dark wood and soft lighting, the kind of place where people celebrate promotions and partnerships. I'd walked past places like this 100 times on my delivery routes, never imagining I'd step inside as a guest. But I wasn't really a guest, was I? I was there because someone remembered at the last minute that having both children present looked better in photos. The room was packed. My brother's friends from law school, colleagues from his firm, and people in suits who spoke in acronyms I didn't understand. They clustered around him like he was magnetic, laughing at his jokes, nodding at his stories about case law and courtroom strategy. He wore success easily, like a jacket tailored just for him. I stood near the entrance, still wearing my coat. No one had offered to take it. My mother glanced at me, once a quick flicker of acknowledgement, before turning back to the conversation she was having with someone's wife. My father didn't look at me at all. I'd known what this would be like. I'd known it the moment my mother called 3 days ago, with that careful voice she uses when she needs something but doesn't want to ask directly. "Your brother's graduation party is Saturday," she'd said. "It would be good if you could make it. Not 'we'd love to see you' or 'we've missed you.' Just that it would be good. Good for appearances. Good for the family portrait they were trying to paint. I should have said no. But some part of me, the part that still remembered being 7 years old and believing my family was supposed to love me, wanted to believe that maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. My brother saw me after about 20 minutes. His expression shifted just slightly from confident to annoyed. He excused himself from his group and walked over, champagne glass in hand, smile still fixed in place for anyone watching. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low. "Mom called. She said I should come." He glanced back at his friends, then at me, measuring something. "You couldn't have dressed better." I was wearing the nicest thing I owned. It was a simple dress I'd bought secondhand. It was clean, presentable, and appropriate. But standing in this room full of designer labels and silk ties, I understood what he meant. I didn't fit. "I came to celebrate with you," I said quietly. "Right." He took a sip of his champagne. "Just try not to talk too much, okay? These people are important." He walked away before I could respond. I stood there, coat still on, surrounded by strangers who were toasting my brother's success. Success that was built in part on money I'd sent every month for 4 years. Money from night shifts and double routes and skipped meals. Money he never acknowledged, never thanked me for, never even mentioned. I thought about leaving then, just slipping out the door before anyone noticed. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the stubborn hope that someone in my family would finally see me. "Hey!" my brother called out suddenly, his voice carrying across the room. He was looking directly at me, and something in his expression made my stomach drop. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I walked over, aware of eyes following me. He pulled me aside, away from the main group, but not quite out of earshot. "You need to leave," he said. "What? You're making this awkward. Look at you." He gestured at my coat, my dress, and me. "These are lawyers, Sophia. Important people. And you're just—" He paused, searching for words, then landed on them with a cruel precision that took my breath away. "You're just a delivery girl." The room didn't gasp. No one rushed to my defense, but I felt the shift. The way conversations paused, the way people suddenly became very interested in their drinks. "You're embarrassing me," my brother continued, quieter now, but no less cutting. "Can you please just go?" My parents were watching. They had to be. But when I looked at them, they looked away. I'd spent 4 years paying for this moment, 4 years making sure my brother could stand in this room in that suit with those people and call himself self-made. And now he was asking me to leave because I was an inconvenience. I turned toward the door. There was nothing left to say, no words that would make them see me, no explanation that would matter. I was already gone. I had been for a long time. I didn't stay to watch my brother's face finish falling apart. I walked out of that restaurant with Richard's words still hanging in the air, got into my car and drove home to my tiny studio apartment with its flickering bathroom light and the neighbor's music bleeding through the walls. My phone started buzzing before I even made it to my block. My brother sent a text. Don't make this worse than it already is. Not, I'm sorry. Not, let me explain. Just a warning like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I didn't respond. I parked, climbed the 3 flights of stairs and collapsed onto my couch. My phone kept lighting up. More texts. Then a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it even though I knew I shouldn't. Sophia, we need to talk about what happened tonight. You shouldn't have brought up family business in front of strangers. It's not appropriate. Your brother is very upset. No, are you okay? No, that must have been hard for you. Just concern for my brother's feelings, my brother's reputation, and my brother's comfort. I deleted the voicemail. Then I deleted the next one without listening to it. The thing is, I'd known exactly how this would go. I'd known since I was 8 years old and my brother got his first trophy for soccer while I won a writing contest. My parents framed his participation medal and put it in the living room. My certificate went into a drawer somewhere. I remember sitting at the dinner table a few weeks after that, wanting to tell them about a story I'd written, something I was proud of. My father had looked at me, then at my brother. Let your brother talk first, Sophia. He had a big game today. My brother talked through the entire meal. When dessert came, I tried again. My mother cut me off. We're listening to your brother, honey. It became a pattern. My voice, my achievements, my existence, all of it secondary to whatever my brother was doing, saying, or accomplishing. If he got a B, it was because he'd tried so hard the material was challenging, or he'd really grown. When I got an A, it was fine, expected, and nothing worth celebrating. They hired tutors for him when his grades slipped. When I struggled with calculus, my father told me to figure it out. You're smart enough, he said, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it means you're on your own. I learned early that there were 2 sets of rules in our house. One for my brother, where effort mattered and potential was infinite. One for me, where nothing I did was ever quite enough to deserve attention. By high school, I'd stopped trying to compete for space at the dinner table. I'd watch my parents light up when my brother walked in, asking about his day, his friends, and his plans. When I came home, I got a distracted, "How was school?" before the conversation shifted back to him. It wasn't that they hated me. It was worse than that. They just didn't think about me unless they needed something. And they needed something when my brother got into law school. I was 19, working 2 jobs, and taking community college classes at night. My brother had just finished his undergrad, and the acceptance letter from his dream law school came with a price tag that made my father go quiet at dinner. It's a lot of money, my mother said carefully. But it's an investment. This is his future. They didn't ask if I wanted to go to a 4-year school. They didn't ask if I had dreams that required investment. The conversation was never about what I needed. It was about what they could extract from me to give to him. My mother called me into the kitchen a few days later. We need to talk about something. I knew before she even started. I could see it in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. Your brother needs help with his expenses, she said. Law school is expensive and we're stretched thin. We were thinking you could contribute. Not ask. Thinking I could, like it was already decided. I'm barely making rent, I said. You're good with money, my mother replied, which was code for you'll figure it out. And you understand, don't you? This is important for the whole family. If your brother succeeds, we all benefit. Except I never would. That was the part she didn't say. My success didn't benefit anyone but me, so it didn't matter. But his success, that was worth sacrifice. I wanted to say no. I should have said no. But I'd spent my entire life trying to be good enough for them to notice me, and some part of me still believed that if I just gave enough, loved enough, or sacrificed enough, they might finally see me as more than an afterthought. So I said yes. The first payment went through on a Tuesday. I'd picked up an extra shift to cover it, which meant I missed a class I needed. But I made the transfer, watched the money disappear from my account, and waited. No one called to say thank you. No one asked if I could afford it. My brother posted on social media about starting law school, talking about hard work and determination. My parents commented with heart emojis and proud declarations. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned. My contribution was invisible. But it kept happening. Every month the payment went through. Every month I worked longer hours to make sure it cleared. And every month the silence from my family grew louder. I started keeping track after the first year, not because I planned to ask for the money back, but because I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy, that this was real, and that I had actually done something that mattered. By the second year, my brother was thriving. He joined a prestigious internship, networked with partners at major firms, and posted photos from law school events in tailored suits. He looked successful. He looked self-made. And I looked like exactly what I was, someone working night shifts to keep someone else's dream afloat. My mother called occasionally, but never to ask how I was doing. She'd talk about my brother's achievements, his stress levels, and how proud they were. Then, almost as an afterthought, she'd mention that the payment had gone through and thank me quickly before changing the subject. It was transactional. I was useful. That was all. I remember one particular call, maybe 2 years in. My mother was gushing about my brother's summer associateship at a top firm. "He's really making something of himself," she said. "We always knew he had it in him." I was sitting in my car between shifts, exhausted, eating cold pizza because I didn't have time to go home. "That's great," I managed. "He's the future of this family, Sophia. Everything we've invested in him is paying off. Everything we've invested. Like I wasn't the one actually making the payments. Like my money, my time, and my sacrifices were just part of the collective family effort that somehow only benefited him." I hung up and cried in that parking lot for 20 minutes before my next shift started. That was the moment I realized the truth. I wasn't part of we. I was the resource they extracted from, the backup plan, the one who filled the gaps so the golden boy could shine. And the worst part, I kept paying anyway, because if I stopped, who would? If I didn't hold up my end of this unspoken bargain, would they finally notice me? Or would they just write me off completely the way they already had in every way that mattered? My phone buzzed again. Another text from my brother. "We need to talk about what you said tonight." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned my phone face down and closed my eyes. I'd spent my whole life being the girl who stayed quiet, who didn't make waves, and who sacrificed without complaint. The girl who was good enough to use but never good enough to celebrate. And tonight, for the first time, someone had said my name out loud in a room full of people who mattered. It hadn't been my family, but it had been enough to crack something open. I dropped out of college on a Tuesday in March. The decision didn't feel dramatic at the time. It felt inevitable, like watching a glass slide off a table and knowing you won't catch it in time. I'd been taking classes at community college for 2 years, trying to piece together an education between work shifts. But the math wasn't working anymore. Between rent, groceries, my own expenses, and the monthly payment to my brother's student loans, something had to give. Education felt like the most expendable thing on the list. I didn't tell my parents right away. I finished out the week, turned in my last assignments, and withdrew quietly. Then I called my mother on Sunday when I knew she'd be home and relatively calm. "I need to tell you something," I said. "What's wrong?" Her voice sharpened immediately the way it always did when I disrupted the routine. "I'm leaving school. I can't afford to keep going." Silence. Then, "You're dropping out." "I'm withdrawing." I corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. "I need to work more hours, and I can't do both." "Sophia," my mother's voice went flat, disappointed. "Do you understand what this looks like? Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'What can we do to help?' Just concern about appearances." "It looks like I can't afford college," I said. "It looks like you're giving up." She paused. "Your brother is in law school, Sophia. He's under incredible pressure and he's managing. Why can't you—" "Because I'm the one paying for his law school," I didn't say. "Because I'm working 50-hour weeks so he doesn't have to. Because you've never once asked me how I'm managing. I'm not giving up," I said quietly. "I'm making a choice. A bad one. My mother sighed that particular sigh that meant I'd disappointed her again. "Your father and I raised you to finish what you start." "I know." "What are you going to do instead? Work retail forever?" "I do delivery and logistics," I said. "And yes, for now." Another silence, heavier this time. When my mother spoke again, her voice had shifted into something colder. "We'll need to talk about this as a family." She hung up before I could respond. The family meeting happened 3 days later. I drove to their house after my shift, still wearing my work clothes, smelling faintly of exhaust and sweat. My brother was already there, sitting at the kitchen table in business casual, looking polished and put together. My parents sat across from him. There wasn't a seat saved for me. I pulled one out myself. "So," my father started folding his hands on the table. "Your mother tells me you're quitting school." I withdrew, I said again, but he talked over me. "Do you understand how this reflects on us? We've always prioritized education in this family." "For some of us," I muttered. "What was that?" I looked at my brother, who was staring at his phone, pretending this didn't involve him. "Nothing." My mother leaned forward. "Sophia dropping out of college is a serious decision. It limits your options. People will judge you for it." "People already judge me," I said. "Not like this." My father shook his head. "Your brother is excelling. He's making something of himself. And now you're going to be a college dropout working a low-wage job." The label landed like a slap. College dropout. I could already hear how they'd introduce me to relatives, to friends, or to anyone who asked. Not our daughter Sophia, but our daughter who dropped out. The embarrassment. The footnote. "I don't have a choice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't afford it." "You made choices that led to this," my father replied. "Poor financial planning. That's on you." I almost laughed. Poor financial planning. As if they didn't know exactly where my money was going. As if the automatic transfer to my brother's loan servicer wasn't visible in my bank account every single month. But they weren't going to acknowledge it. That would mean admitting they'd asked me to sacrifice my own future for his. "We won't be able to help you financially," my mother added. "You're an adult. You made this decision, so you'll have to live with the consequences." "I know," I said. "And you'll need to figure out your own living situation," my father continued. "We can't keep supporting someone who isn't willing to invest in themselves." Supporting. They hadn't supported me in years, but the message was clear: I was being cut off. Not that there was much to cut. They hadn't paid my rent or my groceries, they hadn't helped with tuition. But the symbolic severance felt deliberate, like they needed to make sure I understood my place. My brother finally looked up from his phone. "You're really doing this?" he asked, and for a second I thought he might say something helpful. Then he continued, "You know how this makes us look, right? Us, not you." He was worried about his own reputation, about being associated with a dropout sister. "I'm doing what I have to do," I said. He shook his head and went back to his phone. The meeting ended shortly after that. My parents made it clear they were disappointed that I'd let the family down, and that this was my problem to solve. No one asked if I needed help. No one offered an alternative. They just labeled me, judged me, and moved on. I left without saying goodbye. A week later, I moved out of the apartment I'd been sharing with a roommate and into a cheaper studio across town. It was smaller, older, and louder. But it was mine, and I could afford it on my own. My parents didn't help me pack. They didn't call to check in. The day I moved, my mother texted, "Let us know when you're settled." I didn't respond. My brother, meanwhile, was thriving. I saw it on social media in the photos my mother posted. He'd gotten an award at school. He'd been selected for some prestigious moot court team. He was surrounded by people who looked successful, who looked like they belonged. And in the captions, my mother's pride radiated through every word. "So proud of our son. All his hard work is paying off." All his hard work. I stopped looking after that. The label followed me, though. College dropout. I heard it in my mother's voice when she talked to relatives on the phone. I saw it in my father's eyes the one time I ran into him at the grocery store, the way he looked past me like I wasn't worth the effort of a real conversation. My brother never said it directly, but he didn't have to. The way he stopped mentioning me to his friends, the way he'd skim over questions about his family, the way he introduced our parents but never me. It all said the same thing. I was embarrassed. The one who didn't make it. The cautionary tale. And while they erased me from their narrative, I kept making the payments. Every month, like clockwork, money left my account and went toward my brother's loans. Nobody thanked me. Nobody acknowledged it. It had become invisible, expected, and automatic. I was invisible, but I was still holding them up. The irony wasn't lost on me. The person they'd written off as a failure, the one they were ashamed of, was the reason my brother could stand in those photos looking successful and debt-free. But that irony didn't change anything. It just made the silence heavier. One night, about a month after I'd moved, I sat in my studio apartment and calculated how much I'd paid so far. The number made me feel sick. It was enough to have covered a year of my own tuition, enough to have given me a safety net, a cushion, or a chance. But I'd given it away, and the people I'd given it to had decided I wasn't worth keeping around. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I just sat there in the dark listening to my neighbor's music through the wall and accepted the truth. I'd been erased from my family. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I was no longer useful in the way they wanted me to be. And the worst part was, I hadn't even fought back. I'd just let them do it. The first night shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 in the morning. I'd signed up for it because the pay was slightly better and because I needed my days free to pick up other work. The logistics company I worked for handled last-mile delivery for a few major retailers, and the overnight routes were always understaffed. Nobody wanted to drive around a sleeping city, delivering packages to warehouses and distribution centers going home when everyone else was just waking up. But I needed the money, so I took the shifts no one else wanted. My first week, I barely slept. My body couldn't adjust to the rhythm. I'd get home at 8 in the morning, wired and exhausted at the same time, and lie in bed, staring at the ceiling while sunlight leaked through my blinds. By the time I finally fell asleep, it was early afternoon. I'd wake up at 9 p.m. disoriented and groggy and do it all over again. Nobody from my family called to ask how I was adjusting. Nobody checked in. The work itself wasn't complicated, just relentless. I'd load the van at the depot, follow the route on my scanner unload boxes at dark warehouses, and move on to the next stop. Some nights, I'd deliver over 100 packages. My back ached. My hands got cut from broken boxes and rough cardboard edges. I learned to keep bandages and ibuprofen in the glove compartment. It wasn't the kind of job you told people about with pride. It wasn't a career. It was survival, but it paid the bills. And every month when the automatic transfer went through to my brother's loan servicer, I knew I'd made enough to cover it. I'd been doing the overnight shifts for about 3 months when my mother called. It was a Tuesday afternoon and I'd just woken up. My phone buzzed and I answered without thinking. "Sophia, hi." Her voice was clipped and efficient. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure," I said, still half asleep. "I wanted to talk to you about your brother." Of course she did. It was never about me. "He's under a lot of financial stress right now," my mother continued. "Law school is expensive, and even with the loans, there are so many other costs. Books, living expenses, and networking events. It's adding up." I waited, knowing where this was going. "Your father and I are doing what we can, but it's a lot. We were hoping you could help out a little more." A little more, as if I wasn't already paying a chunk of his loans every single month, as if my contributions were small, inconsequential, and barely worth mentioning. "I'm already helping," I said carefully. "I know, and we appreciate it, but maybe you could pick up a few more shifts just until he gets through this semester." Pick up more shifts. I was already working 50 hours a week, sleeping in fragments and barely keeping myself together. "I don't know if I can," I said. My mother's voice cooled. "It's just temporary, Sophia. Your brother is building a future. This is important. And what I'm doing isn't—" Silence. Then, "That's not what I said." But it was what she meant. My work didn't matter because it wasn't prestigious. My exhaustion didn't count because it wasn't in service of something respectable. I was disposable in a way my brother never would be. "I'll see what I can do," I said, just to end the conversation. "Thank you," my mother said, and hung up without asking how I was, how my week had been, or if I was okay. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, and felt something harden inside me. That night, I logged into my bank account and set up the automatic transfer. Not because my mother had asked, but because I knew if I didn't, no one else would. My brother's loans would go into default. My parents would panic, and somehow it would become my fault. So I set it up. Monthly, consistent, quiet. The first payment went through without acknowledgement. So did the second. And the third. After a while, I stopped expecting anything. The money left my account like rent, like utilities, or like any other bill I couldn't avoid. It became part of the background noise of my life. But I started keeping records, screenshots of confirmations, emails from the loan servicer, dates and amounts. I saved everything in a folder on my phone, not because I had a plan, but because I needed proof that this was real, that I wasn't imagining the weight of it. 6 months into the payments, I ran into a cousin at the grocery store. She lit up when she saw me, gave me a hug, and asked how I was doing. Good, I lied. Busy. I saw your brother's doing amazing, she said. Law school, right? Your parents must be so proud. Yeah, I said. He's working really hard. It's so impressive that he's managing it all on his own, she continued. Your mom was telling everyone at Thanksgiving how independent he is, how he's taking care of everything himself. I felt my chest tighten. On his own. Taking care of everything himself. That's great, I managed. She kept talking, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I finished the conversation, paid for my groceries, and left. In the car, I pulled up my bank account and stared at the latest transfer. $500. Gone. Like it had never existed. And my brother was out there telling people he'd done it all on his own. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to call my parents, and demand acknowledgement. But what would that accomplish? They'd already decided the narrative. My brother was self-made, hardworking, and independent, and I was just the dropout sister who couldn't get her life together. The truth didn't fit their story, so they'd simply left it out. I went home, took a shower, and got ready for my overnight shift. The months blurred together after that. Work, sleep, work, sleep. The payments kept going out. My brother kept succeeding. My parents kept being proud. And I kept disappearing. I picked up a second part-time job doing weekend inventory for a retail chain. It wasn't much, but it helped cover the gap the loan payments created in my budget. I stopped buying anything that wasn't essential. I learned to cook cheap meals in bulk and to stretch groceries as far as they'd go. My apartment stayed bare. No decorations, no upgrades, just the basics. I told myself it was temporary, that eventually I'd save enough to breathe a little easier, but the payments made sure that never happened. One night, about a year and a half in, I was sitting in my van between deliveries eating a protein bar and scrolling through social media. My brother had posted a photo from some law school event. He was wearing a suit and holding a drink, surrounded by people who looked important. The caption read, "Grateful for the journey. Hard work pays off." I stared at that post for a long time. Then I opened my banking app and looked at the transfer history. 18 months of payments. 18 months of my hard work paying off for him. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I just closed the app and finished my route. The thing about being used is that it happens slowly. You don't notice it at first because the requests seem reasonable. Just a little help. Just this once. Just until things get easier. But things never get easier. The asks just get bigger, and the acknowledgement gets smaller until you're giving everything and getting nothing, and somehow you've convinced yourself that this is just how it works. That's where I was. Giving everything, getting nothing. And the worst part was, I'd done it to myself. I'd said yes when I should have said no. I'd kept paying when I should have stopped. But stopping felt impossible, because if I did, I'd be the bad guy, the selfish sister who abandoned her family, and I'd spent my whole life trying not to be that. So I kept going, I kept working, keep paying, and my brother kept pretending he'd done it all alone. The first time I heard my brother's revised origin story, I was delivering a package to an office building downtown. I just dropped off a box at reception when I overheard a conversation in the lobby. 2 men in suits were talking about some networking event. "That kid from Morrison and Hale," one of them said. "The one who clerked last summer, totally self-made, put himself through law school." I didn't catch the name at first, But then the other man said, "Yeah, impressive. His parents didn't help at all. He worked his way through and kept his debt minimal. That kind of discipline is rare." I stopped walking. "What's his name again?" the first man asked. And that's when I heard it. My brother's name. I stood there in that lobby holding my scanner, wearing my company vest with my name badge clipped to it, and listened to two strangers praise my brother for doing something I'd actually done. I left before I could hear more. I got back in my van, sat in the driver's seat, and tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. Self-made, minimal debt, worked his way through. All of it was a lie, not a dramatic intentional lie, just an omission. A convenient editing of the truth that made him look better, made his story more impressive, and made him the kind of person law firms wanted to hire, and no one was correcting it. I drove to my next stop and tried to focus on work, but the words kept circling in my head. Self-made, self-made, self-made. I wasn't surprised exactly. I'd known my family wasn't talking about my contributions, but hearing it repackaged as my brother's personal triumph felt different. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was active rewriting. A week later, I was scrolling through social media and saw a post from my mother. A photo of my brother at some alumni event, standing with a group of successful-looking people. The caption was long and glowing. "So proud of our son for everything he's accomplished. Watching him build his career through hard work and determination has been one of the greatest joys of our lives. He's proof that dedication and independence pay off." Independence. I read that word 3 times, waiting for the anger to hit. But it didn't. I just felt tired. I wanted to comment. I wanted to say, "Actually, I've been paying his loans for 2 years. I wanted to lay it all out, make them see the truth, and force them to acknowledge what I'd sacrificed. But I didn't, because I knew what would happen. My mother would call upset that I'd embarrassed the family. My father would accuse me of being petty. My brother would tell me I was making things awkward, and nothing would change, except I'd be the villain. So I closed the app and went to bed. The narrative kept spreading. I heard it from relatives, from old family friends, and from people who barely knew us. My brother was doing so well, he was so independent. Oh, he'd really made something of himself without any help. My mother told the story at a family gathering I wasn't invited to. I heard about it later from a cousin who thought I'd find it inspiring. "Your mom was saying how your brother managed everything on his own," she told me over the phone. "She said he's been really smart about finances and didn't rely on anyone. It's amazing." "Yeah," I said, "amazing." "You must be proud of him." I didn't know how to answer that. Proud I was funding him. I was the reason he could claim independence, but nobody knew that because my family had decided it wasn't part of the story. "Sure," I finally said. "He's doing great." After I hung up, I pulled up my bank records and stared at the payments. 2 years of transfers. Consistent. Never late. Thousands of dollars. And none of it existed in the story my family was telling. I thought about confronting my brother. I drafted a text a dozen times trying to find the right words. Something that wasn't accusatory, but still made him acknowledge the truth. "Hey, I heard you're telling people you handled law school on your own. Just wanted to make sure you remember I've been helping with the loans." I deleted it. "I know you're proud of what you've accomplished, but it would be nice if you mentioned my contributions sometimes." Deleted. "Why are you lying about where your money comes from?" Deleted. I couldn't send any of them. Because the truth was I didn't want to fight. I wanted acknowledgement. And you can't demand that. It either exists or it doesn't. For my brother and my parents, it didn't. A few months later, my brother got a job offer at a major firm. My mother called me ecstatic, talking a mile a minute about his salary, his benefits, and his future. "He did it all himself," she kept saying. "We're just so proud." "That's great, Mom," I said. "He's proof that hard work pays off," she continued. "No shortcuts, no handouts, just determination." I almost laughed. "No handouts. Just 2 years of monthly payments from his sister." "I'm happy for him," I said, because what else could I say? "You should be," my mother replied. "He's really an inspiration." After she hung up, I sat on my couch and stared at the wall. An inspiration. My brother, who'd built his success on money I'd earned delivering packages at 3 in the morning, was an inspiration. And I was nobody. That night, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I started saving every email confirmation from the loan servicer, every receipt, every bank statement showing the transfers. I organized them into a folder on my laptop labeled with dates and amounts. I didn't have a plan for them. I wasn't plotting revenge. I just needed proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I'd actually done this even if no one acknowledged it. Proof that I existed. Because the way my family talked about my brother's success, it was like I'd never been part of it. Like the money had appeared out of nowhere, like his loans had paid themselves, and like I'd contributed nothing. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it was easier for them to believe the story they'd created, the one where their golden child succeeded entirely on his own merit. But I had the receipts. I had the truth, even if I was the only one who cared. The text from my mother arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, appearing on my screen like a cold clinical summons. Your brother's graduation party is next Saturday. It would be good if you could come. She didn't say they missed me. She didn't say they wanted to celebrate as a family. She simply noted that it would be good for me to be there, a polite way of saying my presence was required to complete the image of the perfect supportive household they like to project to the world. I spent the days leading up to the event in a state of quiet dread. While my mother sent follow-up texts reminding me to dress appropriately and stay mindful of my brother's important guests, I was working double shifts delivering packages through the rain and the midnight silence. Every time I looked at my beat-up delivery van, I thought about the irony the very job they found so embarrassing was the only reason my brother could afford to stand in a room full of partners and celebrate a debt-free education. By the time Saturday arrived, I was exhausted. I stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror of my studio apartment, adjusting the simple dark dress I had bought for a job interview years ago. I looked like what I was, a girl who worked too much and slept too little. As I drove toward the upscale downtown restaurant, my phone buzzed with one final message from my brother. Just try not to talk too much, okay? These people are important. Don't make this weird. I pulled into the valet, handed over my keys, and stood before the heavy dark wood doors. I took one last breath of the night air, knowing that inside I wouldn't be a daughter or a sister. I would be an uninvited guest at a feast I had paid for. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the hum of a life I was never meant to share. The hum of the expensive restaurant had begun to feel like static in my ears. I had spent the last hour trying to remain as small as possible, tucked away in the shadows of the private room, just as my mother had instructed. From my vantage point, near the heavy velvet curtains, I watched the family I had funded play their roles with practiced ease. My father's hand never left my brother's shoulder. My mother's smile never faltered as she introduced the self-made lawyer to his future colleagues. I checked my phone, the screen glowing with a text my brother had sent just minutes prior. Try not to embarrass me. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I was the one who had skipped meals to ensure his tuition was paid. I was the one who worked double shifts in the rain so he could wear that tailored suit. Yet here I was being treated like a stain on a white carpet. I decided I had reached my limit. There was no dignity in staying where I was clearly considered a liability. I began to weave through the clusters of people, my eyes fixed on the exit. My coat clutched tightly to my chest like a shield. I was almost free when his voice, sharp, cold, and loud enough to draw a radius of silence, stopped me cold. Sophia. I turned. My brother stood there, flanked by a group of partners from his new firm. He didn't look like a brother. He looked like a landlord dealing with an unwanted tenant. "Leaving already?" he asked. The smile he wore for the crowd was gone, replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. "I have work in the morning," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its edge. "Good. You've spent the whole night looking out of place. It's awkward for everyone." He gestured vaguely at my second-hand dress, then turned back to his colleagues with a dismissive wave of his champagne glass. "Relax, everyone. She's just a delivery girl. She's got a long route ahead of her." The laughter that followed was polite, but the sting was absolute. I felt the heat rise to my face, a mixture of shame and a burgeoning righteous fury. He hadn't just dismissed my job, He had dismissed my existence in front of the very people who were praising his independence. "You're embarrassing me, Sophia," he added, leaning in one last time. "Just go." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply turned toward the door, ready to let the darkness of the city swallow me whole. I was 3 steps away from the exit when the atmosphere of the room shifted violently. "Wait!" The word didn't come from my family. It came from a table near the center of the room. A man stood up, Richard Miller. I recognized him from earlier, but now his pleasant demeanor had vanished. He wasn't looking at my brother. He was looking at me with a piercing intensity that made the entire room go still. "Your sister," Richard said, his voice carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Your sister is Sophia." The panic on my brother's face was instantaneous. It was the look of a man who had built a house of cards and just felt the first gust of wind. Yes, Mr. Miller. I'm sorry if she's been in the way." Richard ignored him entirely, stepping out from behind the table. "Sophia," he repeated, his gaze locked on mine. "The one who's been handling the payments." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the sound of a lie being crushed under the weight of the truth. My mother moved forward, her face a mask of strained etiquette, but Richard didn't give her an inch. "I believe," Richard said, his eyes finally flicking to my brother, "that we have been operating under a very significant misunderstanding regarding your definition of self-made." I stood by the door, no longer the delivery girl retreating into the night, but the pivot point upon which my brother's carefully constructed world began to tilt. For the first time in 4 years, the invisible girl was the only person in the room who truly mattered. The silence that followed Richard Miller's question was absolute. My brother's face drained of color, his champagne glass trembling slightly in his hand. Yes, Mr. Miller." My brother stammered, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry if she was bothering you. She was just leaving." Richard didn't even glance at him. He stepped out from behind the table and walked toward me, ignoring the elite crowd. "Sophia," he repeated, his gaze locked on mine. "The one who's been making the student loan payments, every month, for the last 4 years. The room felt like it was holding its breath. My mother moved forward, her face a mask of strained etiquette. "Richard, surely this is a private family matter. There must be some confusion." "There is a great deal of confusion, but not on my part," Richard replied, his tone final. He turned his attention back to my brother, his expression unreadable. "You told the hiring committee that you managed your education independently. You allowed us to believe that your minimal debt was a result of your own financial discipline and part-time work." "I never lied," my brother shouted, but the desperation in his voice gave him away. "Family helps each other. It's not a big deal." "It is a very big deal when it concerns the integrity of a potential associate," Richard said coldly. He looked back at me. "Do you have the record, Sophia, to confirm what I found?" I didn't hesitate. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but my heart was firm. I opened the folder I had been building for years, the digital receipts, the confirmation emails from the loan servicer, the bank statements showing 4 years of automatic transfers from my account to his. Richard scanned the screen as my father stood frozen, and my mother looked as though she might faint. The partners from the firm began to whisper, their eyes shifting from my brother to the evidence in my hand. The golden boy was unraveling in real time. "Monday morning, my office," Richard said to my brother, his voice like ice. "We will discuss your future, or lack thereof, at this firm." Richard looked at me one last time, his nod respectful, before picking up his coat and walking out. The party was over. My brother stood in the center of the room, ruined. My parents looked at me with a mixture of shock and burgeoning rage, but for the first time their opinion didn't matter. I had spent 4 years paying for his dreams, but tonight I had finally bought my own freedom. I turned and walked out the door, stepping into the cool night air, finally invisible to them, but entirely seen by myself. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel and trying to process what had just happened. My phone was buzzing nonstop. Texts from my mother, missed calls from my father, a voicemail from my brother that I deleted without listening to. I turned my phone face down and stared out the windshield. Inside that restaurant, my family was probably scrambling. They were trying to control the narrative, smooth things over, and convince people that this was all a misunderstanding. My mother would be making excuses, my father would be defending my brother's character, and my brother would be doing damage control trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. But the truth was out now, and truth, once spoken, doesn't go back into hiding. I thought about Richard Miller, the man who'd stood up and said my name. I didn't know him. I'd never met him before tonight. But somehow he'd known about the payments. He'd known enough to ask the right questions. I wondered how. Had he seen records? Had someone tipped him off? Or had my brother been careless and mentioned something in passing that didn't add up? It didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd asked and I'd answered, and now everything was different. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Richard Miller. I got your number from the firm's guest list. I wanted to apologize for putting you on the spot tonight. That wasn't my intention." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Another text came through. "If you're willing, I'd like to talk. Not about your brother, about you." I typed back slowly. "Why?" His response was almost immediate. "Because I don't think anyone's asked you your side of the story." I sat with that for a moment. Then I wrote, "Okay." He sent me an address, a coffee shop 2 blocks from the restaurant. "I'll be here for another hour if you want to stop by. No pressure." I almost didn't go. It would have been easier to drive home, lock my door, and pretend this night hadn't happened. But I'd spent 4 years being quiet, being invisible, and letting my family tell their version of events without me. I was tired of being erased. I started the car and drove to the coffee shop. Richard was sitting at a corner table when I walked in, a laptop open in front of him and a cup of coffee growing cold beside it. He looked up when I approached and gestured to the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming," he said. I sat down, still wearing my coat. "I don't understand what just happened." "I imagine not." He closed his laptop and leaned back. "I'll be honest with you. I've been reviewing your brother's file for the past few weeks. We're considering him for a permanent position, and part of that process involves due diligence. And you found something." "I found inconsistencies." And he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your brother has a strong resume, good grades, solid performance during his clerkship. But there were gaps in his financial disclosures, small things that didn't quite line up." "Like what?" "Like the fact that his student loans were being paid off at a rate that didn't match his reported income. He claimed he was managing it through careful budgeting and part-time work, but the numbers didn't add up." I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. "So you investigated?" "I asked questions," Richard corrected, "and eventually I found records of payments coming from an account that wasn't his. Your name was on those records." "And you didn't confront him privately?" "I tried." Richard's expression darkened. "I called him into my office last week and asked him directly about the discrepancies. He lied, told me the payments were from a family fund, a one-time gift. He made it sound insignificant. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't." He met my eyes. "I don't tolerate dishonesty, especially not from people I'm supposed to trust with client matters and sensitive information. So I did more digging. And tonight, when I saw you there, I realized I had an opportunity to get the truth. By ambushing me in front of everyone." Richard winced. "I know how it looked, and I'm sorry for that. But I needed to see how your brother would react when confronted publicly. I needed to know if he'd own up to it or keep lying." "And he kept lying. Until he couldn't anymore." Richard sighed. "For what it's worth, I believe you. I believe you've been carrying this weight for years, and I believe your family has let you." The words hit harder than I expected. I looked down at my hands, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on your brother. If he's willing to be honest and acknowledge what happened, there might be a path forward. But if he continues to misrepresent himself, I can't in good conscience keep him at the firm." "So you're going to fire him?" "I'm going to give him a choice," Richard said. "Integrity or his job. He can't have both if he's not willing to be truthful." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction. My brother had built his success on my silence, And now that silence was broken. He'd have to face consequences. But another part of me just felt tired. This wasn't the revenge I'd imagined, if I'd ever imagined revenge at all. This was just the truth, messy and uncomfortable, forcing everyone to see what they'd been ignoring. "I didn't plan this," I said quietly. "I didn't come here to ruin him." "I know." Richard's voice was kind. "But sometimes the truth ruins things all on its own." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Richard reached into his bag and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything, a reference, a connection, or advice, call me. What you did tonight took courage. Whether you meant to or not, you stood up for yourself. That's not easy." I took the card, my hand still shaking slightly. "Thank you." He stood gathering his things. "Take care of yourself, Sophia. You deserve better than what they've given you." He left, and I sat alone in the coffee shop, staring at the business card in my hand. For 4 years, I'd paid my brother's loans without asking for anything in return. I'd worked myself to exhaustion, skipped meals, and lived in a cramped apartment, all so he could have the future my parents wanted for him. And in return, I'd been erased, dismissed, and humiliated. But tonight, someone saw me. Someone had said my name out loud and made it matter. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if my family would apologize, or if my brother would face real consequences, or if anything would actually change. But I knew one thing: I was done being invisible. The messages didn't stop. By the time I got home that night, my phone was full of texts, missed calls, and voicemails I wasn't ready to listen to. My mother, my father, and my brother were all demanding explanations, apologies or something. I turned my phone off and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I turned it back on and immediately regretted it. 17 new messages, 6 voicemails. My family was in full crisis mode, and I was the person they blamed. I scrolled through the texts without opening them, just reading the previews. My mother: "We need to talk about what you did. This is unacceptable." My father: "Call me immediately." My brother: "You just ruined my career. I hope you're happy." I deleted the notifications and put my phone on silent. I didn't owe them a response. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Over the next few days, I heard things through indirect channels. A cousin texted to ask if I was okay, mentioning she'd heard there was drama at my brother's party. A former coworker who knew my family sent a vague message checking in. I didn't give details, I just said I was fine. But I wasn't sure if that was true. What I'd done, or what had been done, because I still wasn't sure how much of it was my choice, had consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. My brother's reputation was damaged. My parents were furious. And I was suddenly the villain in a story I'd never wanted to be part of. But there were other consequences too. Quieter ones. I started noticing things in the days after the party. Small shifts. A message from someone I used to know in high school saying they'd always thought I was underestimated. A former professor from community college reaching out to ask how I was doing, mentioning she'd heard I was navigating something difficult. People were talking, and for once, they weren't talking about how successful my brother was. They were talking about me. It felt strange and even uncomfortable. I'd spent so long being invisible that being seen felt exposing, like I'd lost some protective layer I didn't know I needed. But it also felt like relief. A week after the party, I got a call from Richard Miller. "I wanted to update you," he said. "Your brother and I had our meeting." And he admitted to the payments. Eventually, after a lot of deflection. Richard's tone was measured and professional. He's been placed on probationary status. If he demonstrates honesty and accountability moving forward, he can keep his position. But he's no longer being considered for partnership track. What does that mean for him? It means his career isn't over, but it's not going to progress the way he thought it would. I didn't know how to feel about that. Relief, guilt, satisfaction, maybe all of it. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "There's something else," Richard continued. "A few people at the firm have asked about you. They were impressed by how you handled yourself. If you're ever interested in exploring opportunities, I'd be happy to make introductions." I almost laughed. Opportunities? Me, the college dropout who delivered packages for a living. But Richard was serious. "I mean it, Sophia. You're clearly resourceful, disciplined, and resilient. Those are qualities we value. Think about it." I said I would, though I wasn't sure I believed him. The hardest part came 2 weeks after the party, when my mother finally wore me down enough that I agreed to meet her for coffee. She looked older than I remembered, tired. Her makeup was perfect, and her outfit carefully chosen, but there was something brittle underneath. "I don't understand why you did this," she said as soon as we sat down. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "I just told the truth." "You humiliated your brother. You humiliated us. He humiliated me first." She flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I kept my voice calm, but I felt the anger simmering underneath. "He called me just a delivery girl in front of all those people. He told me I was embarrassing him, and you didn't say anything." "Because we were trying to keep the peace." "You were trying to protect him," I corrected. "Like you always do." My mother's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "You don't understand the pressure he's under. And you don't understand the pressure I've been under. For years." She looked away. "We didn't ask you to pay his loans." "Yes, you did. Maybe not in those exact words, but you made it clear that's what was expected. And I did it. For 4 years. And none of you ever thanked me. None of you ever acknowledged it." "We assumed you wanted to help." "I did," I said quietly. "But I also wanted to be seen, and you made sure I wasn't." My mother was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "I don't know how to fix this." "I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm just asking you to stop pretending it didn't happen." She didn't respond. We finished our coffee in near silence, and when we parted ways, I didn't feel closure. I felt tired. But I also felt clarity. My family wasn't going to change. They weren't going to suddenly see me the way I wanted to be seen. They weren't going to apologize or make amends or acknowledge the years I'd spent holding them up. And I had to be okay with that, because I couldn't keep waiting for their approval. I couldn't keep measuring my worth by whether they noticed me. I had to notice myself. That night, I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic payment to my brother's loans. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. I didn't tell anyone. I just stopped. And for the first time in 4 years, the money I earned stayed mine. The first month after I canceled the payment, I kept expecting something to happen. A frantic call from my brother, an angry voicemail from my father, some kind of fallout. But there was nothing. Either they hadn't noticed yet, or they were too proud to acknowledge it. I used the extra money to pay off a credit card I'd been carrying for 2 years. It felt strange having that balance disappear, like I'd been so used to being in debt and stretching every dollar that financial stability felt foreign. The second month I bought groceries without checking my account first. Small thing, but it mattered. The third month my brother finally called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sophia." His voice was tight and controlled. "We need to talk." "About what? You know what?" I waited. "The payment stopped," he said. "I got a notice from the loan servicer. They're saying the account is past due." "Okay. Okay." His voice rose. "That's all you have to say. What do you want me to say?" "I want you to explain why you suddenly decided to stop helping." "I didn't decide suddenly. I decided weeks ago. I just didn't announce it." "This is going to destroy my credit, Sophia. I can't afford these payments on my own." "Then you'll have to figure something out." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, less angry and more desperate. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything to you," I said quietly. "I'm just opting out." "Opting out," he repeated, like the words didn't make sense. "This is family, Sophia. You don't just opt out." "I do when I'm the only one carrying the weight." "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I said, my voice hardening, "is that I've been paying your loans for 4 years and you've never once thanked me. What's not fair is that you built your entire reputation on a lie. What's not fair is that you called me just a delivery girl and expected me to keep helping you anyway." Silence. "I'm sorry," he said finally, but the words sounded hollow. "I didn't mean it like that." Yes, you did. Another pause, then quieter. What do you want me to do? I want you to take responsibility for your own life. I can't afford this. Then talk to mom and dad, or get a second job, or refinance. I don't know, and honestly, it's not my problem anymore. Sophia. I hung up. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding, but I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. 2 days later, my parents called. Both of them were on speakerphone, which told me they'd coordinated this conversation. Sophia. My mother began, her voice careful. Your brother told us about the payments. Okay. We think you're being unreasonable, my father said. This is a family matter. It should have been discussed. It was never discussed when you expected me to pay, I pointed out. It just became my responsibility. Because we needed help, my mother said, and you were in a position to provide it. I was in a position to survive, barely, and I gave you what I could, but I'm done now. You're punishing your brother, my father said. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm setting a boundary. By abandoning your family, the word stung, but I didn't let it show. I didn't abandon you. You abandoned me, years ago, when you decided I didn't matter as much as he did. My mother's voice wavered. That's not true. It is true. You just don't want to see it. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, my father spoke. If you're not going to help, then we're done here. Okay, I said. Okay. My mother sounded shocked. That's it, you're just going to walk away. I already walked away. You just didn't notice. I hung up before they could respond. After that, the calls stopped. I waited for the guilt to hit the doubt or the voice in my head telling me I'd made a mistake, that I should have kept helping and that family was supposed to come first. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I didn't hate my family. I didn't wish them harm. I just didn't want to be used anymore, and that was enough. A month later, I ran into Richard Miller again purely by accident. He was leaving the same coffee shop I'd just entered, and we nearly collided in the doorway. "Sophia," he said, surprised. "How are you?" "Good," I said and meant it. "I'm glad to hear that." He hesitated, then added, "I heard the payment stopped." "How did you—" "Your brother mentioned it, during a performance review." Richard's expression was carefully neutral. "He's struggling." "I know. And you're okay with that. I'm okay with not being responsible for it anymore." Richard smiled slightly. "Good. That's healthy." We talked for a few more minutes, and before we parted ways, he reminded me about his offer to make introductions. "Think about it," he said. "You have more potential than you realize." I told him I would. That night, I sat in my apartment and looked around. It was still small, still bare, and still nothing impressive. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't paying for someone else's dream. I wasn't sacrificing my own stability to prop up someone who didn't appreciate it. I was just living. For me. And that felt like enough. 3 months after I stopped making the payments, I got a text from my brother. It was short. Just one line, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time, waiting to feel something. Vindication, maybe. Or relief. But all I felt was tired. I didn't respond. A week later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message later that night. Her voice was quieter than usual and less certain. "Sophia, I know we haven't talked in a while. I just wanted to see how you're doing. Call me back if you want." I didn't. Not because I was angry or because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't owe her access to my life anymore. I'd spent years making myself small so they could feel big. I'd worked myself to exhaustion so my brother could succeed. I'd swallowed every dismissal, every insult, and every moment of being overlooked because I thought that's what family meant. But I was done shrinking. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. I worked my shifts, paid my bills, and started saving money for the first time in years. I didn't have a grand plan or a clear destination. I was just moving forward one small step at a time. I treated myself to things I'd denied myself for years. A new pair of shoes that weren't falling apart, a dinner at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try, or a Saturday afternoon spent doing nothing guilt-free. They were small victories, but they mattered. I heard updates about my family through the periphery. My brother was still at the firm, still on probationary status, and still dealing with the consequences of his choices. My parents had quietly stopped posting about him on social media. The narrative they'd worked so hard to build had crumbled, and they didn't know how to replace it. I didn't take pleasure in their struggle, but I didn't feel responsible for fixing it either. One evening, about 6 months after everything had happened, I was sitting in my apartment when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sophia. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. Yes. It's Richard Miller. I hope I'm not bothering you. No, it's fine. What's up? I wanted to follow up on our conversation from a few months ago about opportunities. I'd almost forgotten about that. Okay. We have an opening in our operations department. It's entry level, but it's a foot in the door. I thought of you. I don't have a degree, I said automatically. I know, but you have experience, discipline, and a work ethic that's hard to find. If you're interested, I can set up an interview. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no to stay in the familiar territory of my delivery job and avoid the risk of trying something new and failing. But another part of me, stronger now, wanted to see what I was capable of when I wasn't carrying someone else's weight. Yes, I said. I'm interested. The interview happened 2 weeks later. I was nervous and underprepared, certain I'd be out of my depth, but I wasn't. The hiring manager asked about my experience, my work ethic, and my ability to handle pressure. I told the truth. I talked about the logistics job, the overnight shifts, and the discipline it took to manage multiple responsibilities. I didn't mention my family. I didn't mention the loans. That story wasn't relevant anymore. I got the job. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't a huge salary, but it was stable, and it came with benefits, and it felt like a step forward instead of just treading water. I started a month later. On my first day, I walked into the office building and felt a strange sense of surrealism. A year ago, I'd been delivering packages to places like this, invisible in my uniform and unnoticed by the people who worked inside. Now, I was one of them. It wasn't revenge or a triumph, it was just progress. I didn't hear from my family for a long time after that. No calls, no texts, and no attempts to reconnect. I think they were waiting for me to come back to apologize and to fall back into the role they'd assigned me. But I didn't. And eventually I think they realized I wasn't going to. I thought about them sometimes. I wondered if they missed me, or if they were just relieved not to have the complication of my presence. But mostly I thought about myself, about the person I was becoming without them. I wasn't bitter or angry. I was just done. I'd learned something important in those months. Being underestimated taught me how to survive, but walking away taught me how to live. I wasn't waiting for my family to see my worth anymore. I wasn't waiting for acknowledgement, apologies, or validation. I was building a life that didn't require their approval, and that felt like the best kind of freedom. One night, almost a year after the party, I sat in my apartment and thought about everything that had happened, the humiliation, the confrontation, and the unraveling. It had been painful, messy, and uncomfortable, but it had also been necessary, because I'd spent so long being invisible, being used, and being dismissed that I'd started to believe that's all I was worth. And I wasn't. I was worth more than the money I could provide, more than the sacrifices I could make, and more than the role my family had assigned me. I was worth being seen. And now, finally, I saw myself. If you've ever been the one who carried everything quietly, or if you've ever been made to feel small so others could feel important, I want you to know this. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. And you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that makes them comfortable while you disappear. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. Walking away isn't failure. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. I did, and I don't regret it, not for a second.